Thomas Ackerman stood frozen at the edge of his east pasture, coffee mug suspended halfway to his lips as the morning sun illuminated what appeared to be a construction site on his property. He blinked several times, certain his eyes were playing tricks on him. But there it was, undeniable and brazen, the wooden frame of a large structure rising from the ground just inside his property line. "What in God's name?" he muttered, setting his mug on a fence post and striding across the dewy grass. At 62, Thomas had lived on this 80-acre farm in Millfield County his entire life. The land had been in his family for 4 generations, each acre carefully tended and cherished. He knew of every tree, every dip in the landscape, every property marker, which is how he knew, without a shadow of doubt, that whoever was building this structure was doing so on Ackerman land. As he approached, the hammering grew louder. Around the corner of the half-built frame came Victor Ramos, his neighbor of 3 years, carrying lumber on his shoulder. Behind him followed 2 construction workers Thomas didn't recognize. "Morning, Tom," Victor called cheerfully, as if nothing was amiss. "Beautiful day to build, isn't it?" Thomas felt heat rise in his chest. "Victor, what exactly do you think you're doing on my property?" Victor's smile faltered only slightly. "Just putting up a garage. Need more storage space for my equipment. On my land?" Thomas gestured emphatically at the ground beneath them. Victor set down the lumber and pulled a folded paper from his back pocket. No. This is my land, see. I had a survey done last month." He thrust the paper toward Thomas. Thomas didn't bother looking at it. He had his own survey done when he considered selling a small parcel 2 years back. "This is Ackerman property, Victor. Has been since 1945. That boundary marker," he pointed to a metal stake 30 feet away, partially hidden by tall grass, "has been there longer than either of us has been alive." Victor's workers exchanged uncomfortable glances but continued hammering. "Look, I understand you're confused," Victor said, his tone taking on a condescending edge that made Thomas's jaw clench. "But my survey clearly shows this is Ramos land. I wouldn't build on someone else's property." "Yet here you are," Thomas replied, his voice dangerously quiet. "Stop construction immediately and remove what you've already built." Victor laughed, and clapped Thomas on the shoulder. "We're neighbors, Tom. Let's not make this difficult. Tell you what, you can use the garage too if you need the space." Thomas stepped back from Victor's touch. "I'm not joking. You stop this now, or I'll be forced to take action." "What action?" Victor's smile disappeared entirely now, replaced by something harder. "This is my land. I have papers. You're an old man making a fuss over nothing." The workers had stopped hammering, watching the confrontation uneasily. "You have until sunset to clear out," Thomas said firmly. "After that, I'm calling the sheriff." As Thomas turned to walk away, Victor called after him. "You're making a mistake, Ackerman. I put a lot of money into this already." Thomas didn't respond. His hands were shaking with anger as he retrieved his coffee mug. The farm had weathered drought, flood, and economic hardship, but never such a brazen encroachment. He gazed back at the partially built structure, a foreign growth on his beloved land. Inside his farmhouse, Thomas pulled out the deed to his property and the survey documents from his filing cabinet. Then he called his daughter, Caroline, an attorney in the city. "Dad, everything okay?" she answered, detecting the tension in his greeting. "No," Thomas replied, watching through his kitchen window as Victor's truck delivered more building materials to the site. "Everything is not okay, and I'm going to need your help." Caroline Ackerman arrived at her father's farmhouse the following Saturday, legal briefcase in hand and determination in her eyes. At 38, she had made a name for herself at a prestigious law firm in the city, specializing in property disputes. She'd never imagined her expertise would be needed to defend her family's own land. "This is everything?" she asked, spreading the documents across her father's oak dining table, the same table where she'd done her homework as a child. "That's the original deed, the 2022 survey and property tax records going back 20 years, Thomas confirmed, pointing to the respective stacks. "And this," he pulled out a weathered ledger, "is my grandfather's record of the boundary markers being placed in 1945. Caroline leaned over the survey map. "And you said the construction is happening here?" She tapped a spot near the eastern boundary. "Yes. And it's not stopping. Victor added more framing yesterday and poured a concrete floor this morning. He's acting like I never objected." Caroline's mouth tightened. "This is blatant. His survey must be incorrect." She pulled out her phone, scrolling through her contacts. "I know an excellent surveyor who can come out Monday for an official reassessment. In the meantime, we need to document everything." They walked the property line together, Caroline photographing the boundary markers and the construction site from multiple angles. The garage now had walls and the beginnings of a roof. Victor was nowhere to be seen, but his workers nodded uncomfortably as Thomas and Caroline examined the structure without stepping onto the contested area. They've ramped up construction, Thomas muttered. He's trying to finish it before we can stop him. Caroline nodded. Classic tactic. He's hoping to argue hardship if it's complete. Let's send the cease and desist today. By Monday afternoon, the new survey was complete, confirming what Thomas had known all along. The garage sat 17 feet inside Ackerman property. Caroline personally delivered the cease and desist letter along with the survey results to Victor's front door. Victor answered in paint-splattered jeans, his expression darkening when he saw Caroline. Let me guess. The old man sent his daughter to fight his battles. Mr. Ramos, I'm Caroline Ackerman, representing my father in this property dispute. This letter formally demands that you cease construction immediately and remove all structures from Ackerman property within 7 days. She held out the envelope. Victor didn't take it. My survey says otherwise. Your survey is incorrect. We've had a new assessment done. Caroline placed the documents in his unwilling hands. The garage is 17 feet inside my father's property line. If construction continues, we'll file an injunction on Wednesday. Victor's face flushed. I've already spent over $30,000 on this build. That's unfortunate, Caroline replied coolly, but it doesn't change the property lines that have been established for nearly 80 years. As she turned to leave, Victor called after her. This isn't over, counselor. I know people in this county. So do we, Mr. Ramos, Caroline replied without turning around. My family has lived here for 4 generations. Back at the farmhouse, Thomas was on the phone with neighbors. Word had spread quickly through the rural community, and support was rallying for the Ackermans. Old grudges were set aside as neighboring farmers shared their own stories about Victor's disregard for boundaries since moving in 3 years ago. Bill Harmon says Victor tried to reposition the fence between their properties last year, Thomas reported to Caroline. And the Wilsons mentioned something about water rights. Caroline took notes. This establishes a pattern. It'll help our case. The next morning, Thomas called Caroline in a fury. He's still building. There are 5 workers out there now, and they've started on the roof. When Caroline arrived, she found her father photographing the construction from his property. She approached one of the workers, who quickly directed her to Victor. The neighbor stood supervising, arms crossed defiantly. You received our letter, Caroline stated. I did, Victor admitted without concern. I also spoke with my own attorney. He says possession is 9/10 of the law, and I've been using this access point since I moved in. Caroline's professional veneer nearly cracked. That's not how property law works, Mr. Ramos, and you know it. We'll see you in court. As she walked away, Thomas' weathered hand settled on her shoulder. He thinks he can bully us because I'm old and you're not from around here anymore. Caroline squeezed her father's hand. He's about to learn how wrong he is. The Millfield County Courthouse stood as it had for over a century, a stately brick building with white columns and a sense of permanence that had weathered countless disputes. On this Tuesday morning, its mahogany-lined courtroom B hosted a case that had become the talk of the county. Thomas adjusted his tie nervously. He hadn't worn a suit since his wife's funeral 5 years ago, and the collar felt tight against his weathered neck. Beside him, Caroline arranged documents with practiced efficiency, occasionally glancing toward the opposing table where Victor sat with his attorney, Bradford Wheeler, a slick lawyer from the city known for aggressive tactics. All rise, the bailiff announced as Judge Eleanor Simmons entered, her gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. At 65, she had a reputation for no-nonsense rulings and little patience for deception. Please be seated, she instructed, settling her reading glasses on her nose. Ackerman versus Ramos, case number 2025 CV-1078, emergency injunction hearing. She glanced between the parties. I've reviewed the filings. Ms. Ackerman, you may proceed. Caroline approached the bench with confident strides. Your Honor, this is a straightforward case of encroachment. The defendant, Mr. Ramos, has constructed a garage 17 feet within my client's property boundaries without permission. Despite being presented with survey evidence and a cease and desist letter, Mr. Ramos has accelerated construction in what appears to be an attempt to establish a completed structure before legal intervention. She presented the surveys, both the defendant's flawed assessment and their own recent certified survey. The judge examined them carefully. We request an immediate injunction to halt construction and the removal of the unauthorized structure from Ackerman property. Judge Simmons nodded. Mr. Wheeler, your response? Bradford Wheeler rose, adjusting his designer tie. Your Honor, my client has relied in good faith on a professional survey conducted by Adams Surveying. He invested significant resources based on this information. Moreover, we contend that the Ackerman family has abandoned maintenance of this portion of their property for years, effectively ceding the disputed area through neglect. Thomas's face flushed with anger, but Caroline placed a restraining hand on his arm. Furthermore, Wheeler continued, Mr. Ramos has been using an access path through this area since purchasing his property 3 years ago, without objection from the Ackermans. This establishes an easement by prescription. Judge Simmons peered over her glasses. An easement requires longer use than 3 years, counselor, as I'm sure you're aware. Wheeler smiled thinly. We have affidavits from previous owners indicating the path has been used for over 20 years. Caroline stood immediately. Objection, Your Honor. These alleged affidavits weren't provided in discovery. Sustained, Judge Simmons replied, Mr. Wheeler, you know better. The testimony continued for hours. Thomas took the stand, explaining his family's history with the land, showing the court his grandfather's ledger documenting the boundary marker's placement. His voice grew emotional as he described discovering the construction. That land has been farmed by Ackerman since my grandfather cleared it by hand. Every inch of it matters. During cross-examination, Wheeler tried to portray Thomas as a forgetful old man confused about his property lines. Thomas remained steady, answering each question with clear-eyed certainty. Victor's testimony came next, full of contradictions Caroline quickly exploited. He claimed he believed the land was his, then admitted he never walked the boundaries with the original surveyor. He insisted the path had been regularly used but couldn't provide photographic evidence despite claiming to document all property improvements. Mr. Ramos, Caroline asked during cross-examination, did you ever discuss boundary lines with my client before beginning construction? I didn't think I needed to, Victor replied dismissively. My survey said it was my land. And when my client informed you there was a discrepancy, I thought he was confused. So confused that you accelerated construction after receiving legal notice? Victor shifted uncomfortably. I had contractors scheduled. The courtroom's gallery had filled throughout the day, mostly with local farmers and longtime residents. A quiet murmur followed Victor's testimony, quickly silenced by the judge's stern look. The surveyors testified next. Victor's surveyor appearing increasingly defensive as Caroline questioned his methodology. The Ackerman surveyor, a certified professional with 30 years' experience, methodically explained how the original survey had failed to account for several official markers. Thomas woke before dawn the next morning, a lifetime of farming habits impossible to break. He moved through his morning routine mechanically, coffee brewing, boots laced, hat placed deliberately on his head. Caroline had stayed overnight in her childhood bedroom, promising to return to the courthouse together for Judge Simmons' written ruling. As the first hints of daylight crept over the eastern horizon, Thomas stepped onto his porch and froze. The distant sound of machinery rumbled from the direction of the disputed property. You've got to be kidding me, he muttered, setting down his coffee mug and striding toward the sound. The scene that greeted him sent anger rushing through his veins. Despite the explicit court injunction, Victor's construction crew was back, this time with heavy equipment. A small excavator was digging around the garage foundation, and workers were unloading supplies from a truck. Thomas pulled out his phone and called Caroline while marching toward the site. Dad, what's wrong? Caroline answered, her voice thick with sleep. He's still building. Get dressed and call the sheriff. Victor stood supervising the work, his back to Thomas. When he turned and spotted the approaching farmer, his expression shifted from surprise to defiance. Morning, Ackerman, he called with false cheer. Beautiful day. What the hell do you think you're doing? Thomas demanded, stopping at the edge of the excavated area. The judge ordered all construction to stop. Just securing the existing structure, Victor replied smoothly. Can't have an unsafe building site. Thomas gestured toward the fresh lumber being unloaded. That's not securing anything. That's continuing construction in direct violation of a court order. Victor stepped closer, lowering his voice. Look, old man, by the time your precious judge makes this permit, I'll be finished. Then it becomes a matter of demolition, appeals, more delays. You'll die before this garage comes down. The casual cruelty of this statement hit Thomas like a physical blow. Before he could respond, Caroline's voice rang out behind him. Mr. Ramos, step away from my father immediately. She approached rapidly, phone in hand, her expression glacial. I'd just spoken with Sheriff Donovan. He's on his way with a deputy to document this violation of a court order. Victor's smile faltered slightly. We're securing an unsafe structure. With new lumber and foundation work, Caroline took photos of the construction activity. Judge Simmons will be very interested in your interpretation of cease all construction. Victor's foreman approached hesitantly. Mr. Ramos, maybe we should stop until this is sorted out. I can't afford trouble with the law. You're not stopping anything, Victor snapped. I'm paying you to finish this job. You're paying them to commit contempt of court, Caroline corrected, continuing to document the scene. Each of you could face fines or jail time. The workers exchanged nervous glances. One by one, they set down their tools. The excavator operator killed the engine. What are you doing? Victor demanded. Get back to work. Sorry, boss, the foreman said, removing his hard hat. My cousin's the county clerk. I know Judge Simmons doesn't mess around with contempt charges. Within minutes, the construction crew had packed up their tools and departed, leaving Victor standing alone as his sheriff's department SUV pulled up. Sheriff Donovan, a barrel-chested man with 30 years of law enforcement experience, surveyed the scene with practiced eyes. "Morning, Tom, Ms. Ackerman." He nodded to them before turning to Victor. "Mr. Ramos, got a report you're violating Judge Simmons' direct order." "I'm securing an unsafe structure," Victor insisted. The sheriff examined the fresh excavation and new building materials. "Doesn't look like securing to me. Looks like continuing construction." He pulled out a notepad. "I'll be documenting this for the judge." "This is harassment," Victor sputtered. "You're all in this together because I'm an outsider." Sheriff Donovan raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Ramos, I enforce the law regardless of how long someone's lived here. And right now, you're in violation of a court order. I'm giving you an official warning. If my deputies drive by later and see any construction activity, you'll be facing arrest." Back at the farmhouse, Caroline prepared for their return to court while making calls to update their attorney colleagues in the city. Thomas sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a fresh cup of coffee, his expression troubled. "He said I'd die before the garage comes down," he said quietly when Caroline finished her. 28 days after Judge Simmons' ruling, Thomas sat in his pickup truck at the edge of his east pasture, watching as a demolition crew dismantled what remained of Victor's garage. The roof and walls had come down over the previous week, and now they were breaking up the concrete foundation with jackhammers. The noise was tremendous, but to Thomas it sounded like justice. Caroline pulled up beside him in her rental car, stepping out with 2 cups of coffee from the local diner. She handed one to her father through his open window. "I spoke with Wheeler this morning," she said, leaning against the truck. "Final inspection is scheduled for tomorrow. The county assessor will verify the land has been properly restored." Thomas nodded, watching as the last chunk of concrete was lifted by a small excavator. "Never thought I'd be so happy to see my land torn up. The past 4 weeks have been anything but smooth. After the court ruling, Victor had disappeared for 5 days, ignoring all communication from his attorney. Wheeler, increasingly frustrated, had finally arranged for a demolition company himself, billing his client directly. When Victor finally resurfaced, he filed a desperate appeal that was summarily rejected. His next move had been to approach Thomas directly, arriving unannounced at the farmhouse with an offer. $50,000 for that useless strip of land, he proposed, standing on Thomas's porch. "More than it's worth. Everyone wins." "Not interested," Thomas had replied simply. "Don't be stubborn," Victor had persisted. "That's 10 years of your farm's profit for a piece of land you don't even use." Thomas had regarded him steadily. "Mr. Ramos, there are 2 things you still don't understand. First, every inch of my farm matters to me. Second, after what you put me through, I wouldn't sell you a handful of dirt for $1 million. When the demolition finally began, Victor had positioned a lawn chair at the edge of his own property, watching with undisguised hostility. That had lasted 2 days before he'd given up and retreated into his house, blinds drawn. Now, as the last of the debris was being loaded into dumpsters, there was no sign of him at all. "Do you think he's finally accepted it?" Thomas asked Caroline, nodding toward Victor's house. Caroline sipped her coffee. "I doubt it. Men like Victor rarely admit defeat, but legally, he's exhausted his options." A truck pulled up carrying topsoil and grass seed to restore the torn ground. Thomas watched with satisfaction as the workers began spreading the dark earth over the area where the garage had stood. "Dad," Caroline said hesitantly, "I've been thinking. This might be a good time to consider installing security cameras along the property lines." Thomas frowned. "You think you'd try something else?" "I think peace of mind is worth the investment." She squeezed his shoulder. "Not everyone respects boundaries the way you do." That evening, as sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Thomas and Caroline walked the eastern boundary of the farm. The freshly graded soil where the garage had stood was now covered with straw and newly planted grass seed. Surveyor stakes with bright orange flags marked the property line clearly. "It'll green up by summer's end," Thomas said, satisfaction evident in his voice. As they turned to head back to the house, movement caught their attention. Victor stood at the edge of his property, watching them. After a moment's hesitation, he approached, stopping at the newly marked boundary line. "Mr. Ackerman," he said stiffly. "Ms. Ackerman." Caroline nodded coolly. Thomas waited, saying nothing. "I've accepted a job transfer," Victor announced. "I'll be putting the house on the market next month." Thomas hid his surprise. "I see. Before I go, I want to be clear about one thing," Victor continued, his voice strained. "I still believe that survey was correct." Caroline opened her mouth to argue, but Thomas placed a gentle hand on her arm. "We'll have to agree to disagree on that," Thomas said evenly. "But I wish you well wherever you're headed." Victor looked startled at the measured response. He glanced at the restored land and back at Thomas. "The next owner will know exactly where the property line is. I've made sure of that." With that, he turned and walked back to his house without another word. That was unexpected, Caroline murmured as they continued toward the farmhouse. Not really, Thomas replied. Pride's a powerful thing. He needed to have the last word. You were generous, Caroline observed, after everything he put you through. Thomas smiled slightly. What's that saying? Living well is the best revenge. I got my land intact, my family beside me, and soon a new neighbor. I call that living well. 2 months later, Thomas watched from his kitchen window as a moving truck pulled up to